I've always known about Jane and her story, but I never quite understood what it was that she did. I remember when I was 12, I did a project on World War II. I brought in all the newspaper articles my mum had and showed them off to my class. I naively wanted to show my friends that I had this cool relative, but now that I'm a lot older, I understand more and the realisation of Jane's selfless actions really hits home. How did you find out about Jane?
When I was in my teens, I decided to do my family tree, and my dad's sister, she has a fantastic memory, and she has lots of memorabilia from her childhood. She hoards lots of articles and leaflets and so on. So as a result, I decided to go to her, and she was a great source of information. She handed me a newspaper cutting that she had been sent by her father. My Aunt Florence worked away from home when she was young, and at that time she was working in Kent, and her dad, my grandfather, sent her a newspaper article about Jane Haining. Now that was 1951, and she had held on to it ever since. So when I went to visit her, Florence handed me the newspaper article, and I decided to have a copy it out in my best handwriting, of course. I was 15 at the time. I copied it out and I dated it, and that was in 1972. The newspaper was the Evening Citizen, so she had it all those years.
You can remember the name of the newspaper as well?
Well, I had never heard anything about her before I lived in this village, and that was in 1984. And when my children were at the primary school, they came home to learn a song that had been written about a lady called Jane Haining from the village, and that was the first I heard the name. It was a quite intriguing story because nobody spoke about it in the village. And then the minister acquired a book about Jane Haining and gave it to me. And then I kind of looked into her story a wee bit more because the minister wanted to make contact with a minister in Hungary, in Budapest, in the Scottish Church. So it kind of all linked in together, and that was how I first got to know about her.
They lived 200-300 yards up the road from me. And it was Jane's stepmother I knew very well, and she was very friendly with my mother, and her daughter Agnes and their family. They moved to Ireland, but they used to come back for extended periods and stay in the village, and we played together as children.
Your mother used to hoe turnips in the fields?
She worked in the fields, or maybe not in the same field, but over the wall they would have conversations.
With Jane when she was working on their farm. I think it was in your mum told me that story.
I wouldn't argue.
We'll have an argument. I think they were in the same field, because they'd help each other out as people did in those days, I knew nothing about Jane Haining until our children, in about 1987, Anne McLeish, the head teacher at Dunsker, had discovered some information and thought it would make a good play to do in the school. And so she did that, and it happened that Pam, my friend, her son and our daughter were about P6, I think, at the time, and they did this play, and from there Pam almost ran with it, if you like, and we started having this Hungarian link through the Church of Scotland, link with the Boris Marty School, and then the competitions began, and we started getting the Hungarians or girls or students and teachers over every year, which has been wonderful, to meet people and to hear about life over there.
When she was very young, her mother was going to have another child, and so Jane would have had a lot of responsibility even at a very young age, and she worked around the farm, helped around the farm, as all the children did in those days. She would have had to go down to the village with buckets and carry water back up to the farm, or pump the pump nearby to get water. and help around the farm. Probably they would have had hens and things like that. So I think she was a very diligent child. She also liked school. When she was 5, she started at the village school, and the head teacher there realised and acknowledged the fact that she was fairly gifted in that she loved reading, and she read everything she could get her hands on. The family were involved in the Craig Church, and she attended church with the family every week. They probably spent a lot of time on Sundays reading the Bible, and she knew the Bible stories, and she became a Sunday school teacher when she was older. Her mother died in childbirth. The child that the mother was having also died after a little time, so Jane was still the youngest of 3 girls, and she kind of looked after them as well. She's reputed to have been fairly strict at the Sunday school, but I think she was quite a good Sunday school teacher. She probably studied, read the Bible a lot. I think she would have, because when she was in Budapest with the girls that she was teaching, religious education was part of their curriculum, even although most of them were Jewish, but she would have told them stories of the Bible and told them of her love of Jesus.
I was aware of Jane Haining from about 15-20 years ago, but I really became more interested in the whole Jane Haining story when I became the Member of Parliament for this area. And of course I also visited Auschwitz, where I met one of the guides who spoke about Jane in significant detail, obviously. And it was at that time that I wanted to further explore what Jane had actually done. And of course my involvement with the Holocaust Educational Trust made me even more curious about what Jane had done in her short life. The process that we had to go through was to recognise that Jane was one of a number of British heroes of the Holocaust, and they had all been recognised by Yad Vashem, and we just felt that there had been something of a failing by government after government here in the UK to recognise exactly what Jane and all these other heroes had done. So it was about working alongside the Holocaust Educational Trust, and it was trying to raise the profile of all of these individuals in Parliament.
Do you think she went over to convert the girls?
Well, I can't say whether she went over to convert the girls or not, but I feel that when she went there, when she arrived in Budapest, she realised that although they were Jewish and Christian girls, there was no difference between them.
No, definitely not, because they actually brought in rabbi priests for the girls. No, it was to show Christian care and to look after them and to give love in a Christian fashion, but not to convert them from Judaism to Christianity, no, not at all.
And Jane would be like a mother figure to them more, because these children had come from quite a distance to that school.
The fact that she could have stayed at home and was told not to go out there and would have an idea of how dangerous. Well, she would know how dangerous it was, and yet still did it.
She thought more of the children as she did her own life, basically. Children were her life.
I I feel very proud of Jane because she was a farmer's daughter. She came from a working class background, and she felt as if she had a purpose in her life. So she wanted to better herself. She got a good education. She went to Dumfries Academy. She decided to go to Budapest as a missionary. She learned Hungarian. She was fluent in Hungarian. She was very clever, and the fact that she set off on this big adventure into the unknown, travelled across Europe in order to get to Budapest. So, very proud of her.
Jane was an exceptional woman, you know. At the same time, she was an ordinary woman who did extraordinary things. The fact that she was prepared to make sacrifices in all sorts of ways to help people who were in a much, much less fortunate position and who desperately needed help. That still exists today. So it was looking back all those years to understand just how big a sacrifice was Jane prepared to make, the same as all the other heroes.
If you could sum up Jane and her actions in one word, what would it be?
One word's difficult. Courageous, strong faith.
Inspirational.
Inspirational.
There's so many words you could describe it, I suppose. I think inspirational is mine.
Can I use 2 words? Humbly courageous.
I think the word I would choose would be selfless, because Jane gave up so much. She gave up her life for those girls. She didn't have to do that, because after the war started, she was actually on holiday at home, and the Church of Scotland, who she worked for, told her not to go back because the Nazis had invaded Budapest. And Jane, when she heard that, she decided that she would go back to Budapest. And we all know the outcome of that.
I know the warp of a thread of fibers and filaments, silver and red, but these golden stars are blood on my hands. Baliri, baliri, balu. I cradled you all in the sun. I cradle you still, though the day is done, and these golden stars swallow the